Hey, thanks for joining me. A little chilly out today. Uh, let's see. What I wanted to share with you today comes from Dwayne and Roger. They live in Anchorage. They about 20 years ago, they've been best buddies forever. They decided they wanted to do commercial salmon fishing together. So, they reached out to some of their people they knew, and they ended up getting some deckhand jobs out in Bristol Bay. Good place, especially for salmon fishing. It's the largest salmon return in the world. Well, on that particular trip, at the end of the season, the boat captain they were working for lived in Togiak, a local native guy. We'll leave his name out of it. He took them up the Togiak River to Togiak Lake, and they fell in love. It's a gorgeous area. I will put up a screenshot of the map, give you guys an idea. So Togiak is in Bristol Bay, just northwest of Dillingham, around Cape Constantine and up a ways. So they went up there, they got to see the sights, the local took them around, pointed out some places, and it really stuck with them. So about 5 years later, they reached out to the guy. Unfortunately, that gentleman passed away. And anyway, they were looking to talk to him about potentially staying at his house as a base camp and going up Togiak River and going out and exploring that area. Well, the guy's daughter remembered him and was like, well, yeah, that's not a problem. No one will be able to take you, so you have to, rent someone's skiff or pay someone to take you up there. No big deal. So they made their arrangements. They get into Togiak. Now, this is approximately, between 15, 20 years ago. And so Dwayne and Roger, they had their game plan. They didn't go stupid. They seen plenty of bears while they were there. They didn't go without firearms. And what they wanted to do was spend a week or two out in the backcountry, like really getting out there, a couple buddies just checking things out, just getting that Alaskan lifestyle. And, they found a guy, a younger kid, paid him some pretty good money to run him up to Togiak Lake, and basically dropped them and their gear off, right? And paid him good money, expecting him to be there a week later, and left one of their VHF radios with the kid. Now, a little bit out of range for all the way back in Togiak to where they were, but their plan was when the kid came back upriver, turn it on, make the call at a designated time, and they should be within signal range to coordinate getting picked up, right? Great game plan, Back then, they had GPSs available, but it was few and far between, and the options were pretty crummy, so they relied on their maps and compasses. So after talking with them, again, I'll put up a screenshot of a map of the area, and I'll leave some dots on that map to explain what was going on. And the blue dots will be their path going into this valley. The yellow dots will be where they were alerted by strange sounds, and the yellow and orange dot will be where they first had a visual, and then the red dots will be of their experience, with the orange and red being the first spot they seen this creature. So they get up there, and the first couple days aren't bad at all. They kind of stayed really close to the lake, just kind of gently, exploring, going out little by little. And on that second day, they decided they're going to move their camp further back away from the lake, because there was a lot of bear activity going up and down the beach at that time, and they just felt real sketchy about the bear situation. So they said, well, let's go further up this valley. And that valley is, northwest of them, northwest of them, right? So they go up there, 500 yards, something like that, and they found a nice open area, and they plopped camp right in the center of that open area. Now, there's a lot of thick brush around them and everything like that, so they were constantly on the lookout for these bears, because there were a couple trails through there, and they were, a little sketched out about it. But it felt a lot better than where they were right near the lake. So they decided this one day they're going to go on this hike. It was approximately day 4 of their proposed 7-day journey. So as they're going up this small valley, they're just awestruck by the beauty. You know, it's just so gorgeous. They had clear weather, visibility was great. You know, it was a little buggy, but they came prepared. And as they went along, they started skirting off to their left up onto these hillsides to get a better vantage point of game down a little lower in the valley. And they made it up to this one particular peak, and they were looking around, and you know, they weren't really seeing much because it was so thick in there. So they decided, let's go back down and skirt the tree line, and we'll cross to the other side. So once they get over to the other side, they're going along, and they hear this just god-awful scream, but it was way off in the distance. And they were like, wow, that was weird. I wonder what that was, because neither one of them heard anything like it before in their lives. And so with that, they moved a little more cautiously. They made sure their ammo was, you know, in the chamber. They didn't know what to expect. They were just dumbfounded by it, but they weren't gonna stop their adventure because some weird sound way off in the distance. They said, it ain't gonna happen. So they continued, you know, another half mile or so roughly, and they get up to this vantage point once they crossed over to the valley and were up on the little upper elevation just above the trees. And they were looking in the direction that this scream had come from, and they heard it again. And when they heard it this time, they saw this thing moving, and it was just, initially he said it looked like a speck. And Dwayne tells Roger, wow, what is that? Because it was moving very, very fast. And he said they sat there for a while watching this thing move, and they were just dumbfounded at how quickly it moved. And I've seen what they're talking about, because I've seen what looked like a fleck of pepper just ripping across the flats. But anyway, so as they're watching this thing appears to be kind of maneuvering towards them, and that's the feeling they got. So they were like, let's get going out of here. So where the particular spot they were up on, they had to kind of maneuver back down to get better footing, because it was getting a little rocky and a little loose. And so they get back down to where there's, you know, grass in the upper tree line, and they're moving along, and all of a sudden they hear that scream again, but this time it's within 300 yards of them, just right across where they happen to be. It was just down in the brush below them, but across the small valley, right? It could have been a little more distance than that. He was guesstimating, because they were in that fight or flight mode. So Dwayne says Roger would keep an eye out as he maneuvered down, then he would stop, keep an eye out, Roger would maneuver. So they're doing this little leapfrog thing, covering each other, you know, because they didn't know what the hell, because all they could tell, this thing was very large and it was moving very fast, and they didn't know what to expect. And they felt like it was coming for them. Like that's what he kept repeating over and over when we talked. And so as they maneuvered along, they got to the end of the trees, and they felt a little more cover, and so they started moving faster with less looking back, right? So they come back around to where they recognize their trail, where they had crossed over from the other side from an upper point. And they decide they're gonna cut back across, get up to that upper point, and look back down and see what they got going on, see if this thing was following them or not, or try to get a better look at it. So as they start breaking through the thicker brush, heading down to the bottom of this valley, Dwayne said they were stopped because in their path that they saw their path that they came on, as they were going back that same path, all of a sudden a tree about not quite 100 yards away just kind of fell over in the trail, and then another one over the top of that one. And the trees weren't very big. There was some black spruce and stuff, so it wasn't like some big huge trees. They were just smaller ones, but they were being purposefully pushed over the trail. So they stopped, and Roger, being behind him, was like, hey, why are we stopping? And he was like, there's trees, they just got pushed down. And they started hearing this weird noise, and they hear this thing move. They're facing towards it, and it flanks off to their right, and it's basically moving around like a clock would. He said it stayed about that same distance, but it was making this weird grunting, almost like a pig snort, mixed with some weird kind of growl, right? So this thing's just making this huge racket, and they're scared as shit. He said they both had their rifles following the sound. You know, they didn't know if it was going to start coming in on them or what, but this was roughly 100 yards away, and they were really, it was making a huge impression on them. And as they were sitting there, they ended up kind of, as it moved off and it was more directly off to their right, they started going down that trail to kind of create distance. And they're going along, and at some point, he said they were a little terrified, so he doesn't know exactly when it stopped moving around behind them, but at some point it did, and it went dead quiet. He said as they were going down the trail, Roger would stop, keep the gun on their back trail. Dwayne would get ahead about, 50, 60 feet maybe, stop, he would yell out, and Roger would get low, and scurry towards him, and Dwayne would keep guard. So they were doing the leapfrog thing again. They get up to the drop trees. Again, it's been dead quiet for a minute. And as they're sitting there, they're like, oh, this ain't gonna stop us. They could easily maneuver around it. It's not like they were in a big truck and they'd have to saw it up or anything. But they were just like trying to figure out what the hell's going on, because they're in the throes of like, what the hell is going on here with this. They still hadn't seen this thing, and it's making these weird noises, and it's obviously blocking their path. And so they were, to say they were paranoid would be an understatement. They decided to get to the other side of these push down trees and watch their back trail and listen for a little bit, because they felt like whatever had been moving around just went silent and was getting closer to them. From what Dwayne said, Roger kept like, are you hearing that? Are you hearing that? And Dwayne wasn't hearing it. Dwayne was in a state of kind of like shock, like what the hell? But his friend Roger kept hearing the movement, and he goes, no, now it's over here. It's on this side of the trail. As they're sitting there talking, this thing walks out in the trail in front of them, approximately 60 yards away, kind of squats down and is doing this like a line. He said it looked like a linebacker squatted down with both hands on the ground, just kind of rocking back and forth, looking at him. And he said it was looking right at him, and they were trying to stay low and in cover of those fallen over trees. And he said it had to have been at least 10 to 11 foot tall. He said it was real thick. The hair made it very easy to see, because he said it almost looked like it was well groomed, like just form-fitting hair. He said you could see it was hulking. You could tell that it had a lot of weight to it, and it was at just enough of a distance where they couldn't make out exactly what its face looked like. They could just hear these noises it was making, and it was the continued like a pig snort mixed with a growl. And they didn't know what to do. They didn't want to turn their back on it, but they didn't want to stay where they were. So they realized this thing knows we're here. Let's just back away. Let's show that we're willing to back away. And so that's what they do. They both have their firearms up, but they're backing away. He said they got about 40 feet back from the fallen trees, and Roger said, let's do the leapfrog thing again. I'm gonna stand here, you turn around and make tracks, and then holler, and then we'll do like we were doing. And so they continued that for a little bit. Meanwhile, this thing just was down on the ground, just watching them, not necessarily being aggressive, but more studying what they were doing. And he said he could sense the energy in the air changed when they were pointing the rifles at this thing. He said as soon as we pointed rifles at it, he said you could feel the energy in the air just totally changed. It got more ominous. Sorry about the small planes. This is Alaska. There's a small runway back over behind the camera there. But anyway, so they do their leapfrog thing, and they got about 100 yards. They got into some thicker brush. Thing was still on the trail. They could see it through the brush, and they decide let's hightail it up this hill and get to a higher vantage point, and then we'll do the leapfrog thing again, because there's no way to necessarily protect ourselves in this thick stuff. It could be on top of us quick. So with the distance we have now, let's skedaddle up this hill. So according to what Dwayne said, he had Roger run up the hill first through the thick stuff, kind of because it wasn't necessarily the trail they came down on. They came down on a game trail, and this was not the same game trail because their game plan had changed with this thing moving around behind them. So Roger breaks trail going up through. He's breaking limbs out of the way, right? And as Roger's breaking limbs going up and through, Dwayne is keeping an eye on this thing, and at this point it's a good 150 yards away, but it's still in the same position. It's a little obscured by the brush, but he could see it easily. He said it stood out. It was almost pitch black in its color. It had a little bit of a grizzled kind of hair texture to it, but not too much. It was mainly black and a little grizzled along the chest area and down the arms a little bit on the sides, almost like a salt and pepper kind of look to it, right? And he said he couldn't tell if that was from the daylight glimmering on the black or if it was actual gray. Yeah, he just couldn't tell. And plus his mindset wasn't totally picking up every fine detail. He was kind of in shock at what they were watching. They had heard of Sasquatch, Northern California, the whole bit. They heard it all. They didn't necessarily discount it, but they didn't necessarily believe it either. They were kind of like fence straddlers when it really came down to it until this day. Now, as Roger's breaking these branches, it's pretty loud. Some of them are louder than others, and he's trying to work up this hill as quick as he can, but panic stricken and all that. Well, one of the branches that Roger breaks was dry, right? So it made a louder crack than normal. Once that crack happened, this thing stood up to full height, walked over and snapped one of the black spruce in half. It was a beetle kill. It had been dead for a while, and it just cracked and echoed down this valley. And he said at that point he realized Roger breaking the sticks, this thing was taking it as a challenge, and then said, "Oh, you want to break sticks, huh?" And it's kind of walked over, is the feeling he got. Now this is all speculative, but Dwayne, what he picked up was hearing the cracks. This thing immediately stood up, walked over and broke one, and kind of like stood defiantly looking that direction, like what now, kind of like a standoff kind of position versus it's just kind of curious swaying and whatnot. Immediately he yells up to Roger, "Stop breaking limbs." Roger had stopped because he heard that big crack. He said it had to have been at least 6-7 inch diameter on the black spruce, not overly huge. But so immediately Roger says, I got a hole I can see through. I see it standing there. Just come up behind me, get closer to me. So if we have to make a stand, we can be back to back or whatever, right? So of course Dwayne's all about that. He scurries on up, meets up with Roger, and they're not that much further from where they wanted to break through all this brush to where it kind of opens up a little more. So they just wiggle on through there. So once they get up into the clearing, that thing is gone. It's no longer where they saw it. So Dwayne tells Roger, we need to get back to camp, and we need to get down to the lake and use our radio, because they left their VHF radio at camp because they weren't planning on using that little thing. It was just a rover, weren't planning on using it until they needed to, because limited battery life. They weren't trying to have it on all the time for pilots flying by or whatever to drain the battery with the squelching and all that kind of shit. So they get their game plan and boom, they take off. Now as they're running along, they're up on the upper side just above the trees, and they can kind of see down, and it's hard going. He said they were slipping and falling. It wasn't the best terrain, because even though they were out of the thicker stuff, the lower stuff that wasn't that big was still thick, so they're dragging their legs through. And he said he just shredded his pants just getting through all that stuff. And so they finally make it back to camp, and as they get into camp, it's a pack now. It's getting it. Grant you, the land of the midnight sun, they had plenty of daylight, but they felt pressure to get away. They felt that pressure, and they still had a good distance to go to get down to the lake and then follow the lake around. And so they get everything, they get out the VHF radio, and as they're rolling things up, now they went minimal weight as possible, right? Which is smart, They had the heaviest portion was a bunch of canned goods like corned beef hash, chili, you know, things like that, to where they can make a quick meal of it, but it won't leave a scent, and they can burn the cans, right? So it wasn't attracting bears. So they're gathering up their stuff, and as they get to that portion, they had one particular bag that had all the cans stacked nicely, and it was taped together, nice compact, so it wasn't shifting weight on them. It was gone, right? So at that point, he was like, screw it, irrelevant, you know, okay, our food's gone. So they gather up everything, and as they're following their trail back down to the lake, which is, you know, 500 yards or so, that's almost a half mile. They are kind of running down the trail, and as they get closer to the lake, they started noticing bits of this bag. It was kind of like a burlap bag with a zipper on it, and they were noticing pieces of the burlap on and around the trail as they were going down. They're like, what the hell? And then Roger was like, well, it's probably a bear. You know, we probably got some kind of smell on it, you know, because they had stopped to look at this stuff, because, you know, Roger was in the lead. Dwayne grabbed his arm and stopped and says, look, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And Roger's like, it's probably a bear. It probably, you know, we left a smell on it, and, you know, it came and snatched it while we were out of camp. Okay. So they go on down. They continue. They're very cautious. Now they got all this extra weight on them now, and they're dead dog tired from their escape from that valley. And as they get down closer to the lake, it opens back up, and once they get through the willows and stuff, they notice what's left of the bag there, and all the cans that they hadn't used already were still taped together. And he said it was the darndest thing. So they stop, they look around, they're not seeing anything, and they weren't paying attention for tracks at this point. They were just going. So according to what Dwayne said, he had a small satchel that he kept his binoculars in, but instead he hung the binoculars around his neck, and then started sticking as many cans into his bag as he had, or as he could fit. And Roger did the same, right? So they were able to secure all the cans that they found there. The bag was just tore up, and, you know, it was just sitting there. And as they slung everything back on to continue, that's when they started seeing the tracks. He said they were about 19 inches long. One set of tracks, he wore size 11.5 boots. He was able to go heel to toe on one of the tracks, and it was almost as big as that track. So that's a pretty big damn freaking track. You're looking at almost 2 foot long. You know what I mean? Like, that's a big track. And immediately they were taken aback at everything going on. They felt the weight of the world on their shoulders, so to speak. Dwayne said that he started shaking real hard, and Roger snapped him out of it by just, hey, let's go. They dip on down to the lake edge, and when they get to the edge of the lake, there's a little bit of a drop down, and they start going along the beach. And as they come out of the valley to go towards the mouth of the Togiak River that will lead them down to Togiak, they have to hang a right. And as they came off that little bit of a drop and make their right, he said about 60 yards down, they see these two things squatted down, and one of them, their backs were to it. And he said one of them had a piece of the burlap and was kind of holding it up in the light, kind of just looking at it, kind of, you know, examining it. And he said it was the damnedest thing, because then they stopped, they got low real quick, they had the rifles ready. There was a loud noise back in that valley. Real freaking loud noise. He said one of them, the smaller one, stood up, had to have been 6-7 foot tall, and just gone. Just off to their right, out of view, into the brush, and you could hear it just. And then after a little while, the other one was still sitting there. The bigger one was still holding that burlap, just looking at it like another day at the park, you know? And he said it was the damnedest thing. When the second noise came, it was different. He said we could barely hear it, but you could tell it was powerful. It was real low toned. Then the other one that was looking at the burlap stood up, didn't look at them at all, just turned to the right, and boom, disappeared. He said the thing that stood out about the second one is they could tell its feet, for its size, were just huge, just by, you know, watching its silhouette moving, you know, running off. And they sat there, squatted for a little while, heard the thrashing, heard everything going on, and it just disappeared off into the distance, right? And they heard some screams a little later, way back up in the valley, and assumed, okay, they went back. So they calmed down a little bit. They get down a ways. They sat there for a while, and then they broke out the VHF when they heard a plane coming upriver. You know, whoever was flight seeing or whatever was going on, they start radioing, asking them to relay a message. They didn't know what to say. They said that there's heavy bear activity. They need to get out of there. The pilot flew around, spotted them, because they were trying to give them directions. We're down here, we're more this way, that way. The pilot sees them, circles around, tips its wings, and starts heading back towards Togiak. And they give him the kid's name that they had asked him to, you know, keep an ear out and come back and get him. And the guy, being up higher in his plane, radioed out for this person, and everyone in the village had little VHF radios, you know, to talk to the boats out in the whatever. It was just the village form of, you know, cell service or whatever, just quick, easy way to talk to people. And so thankfully the kid was in earshot of his radio, heard it, said, okay, I'm on my way. Well, that's a few hours boat ride to get up there. So they had to sit there. Nothing else happened, but because of what they dealt with, he said it was the hardest, longest wait of his life. Every minute seemed like 5 hours, just the anticipation of this rescue coming. So Dwayne said that when the kid did show up, the kid came ripping up the river right past him, and they're screaming and hollering. Finally the kid sees him, circles around, comes over, beaches a skiff, and was looking around. The kid had his, you know, his bear rifle, and was like, where's the bears? Are you guys okay? Did they, you know? And he goes, no, we're fine. They load up their stuff, and they confide to the kid. They say, hey, we saw this thing. It was huge. We saw 3 of them. One, you know, it appeared to be a big one, a bigger one, and a smaller one. And the kid just kind of nodded, didn't call them liars at all, just was like, okay. Accepted it totally, like, okay. Told him, you know, that's Togiak, the hairy man, and yeah, let's go. And just took it. Dwayne said the most shocking part was this native kid was just like, oh, you're talking about a moose or a bear or whatever, just like another day, no big deal. Yeah, okay, yeah, you saw a hairy man, okay, let's go. And yeah, so that was the end of their experience. Now, I want to thank Dwayne for being patient with, I like to talk to people more than once, 3-4 times about their experience, just so I can get all the little nuances. I allow them to tell me, and then the next time I talk to them, they usually forgot a portion of it, is why I do that. And so I try to get as much of the details for you guys as possible so I could bring you right to the spot. Again, thanks for being patient, dude. I appreciate it. And I want to thank you guys for joining me, and we will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.